Hello, and welcome back to our quiet space. Tonight, our journey takes us to the banks of the Nile to confront one of the most enduring and seductive mysteries in all of human history, the building of the Great Pyramids of Giza. For centuries, their sheer scale, their impossible precision, have led many to wonder if they could truly be the work of human hands. It is a question that has given rise to a powerful and popular modern myth, the story of ancient aliens. This story is an appealing one. It speaks of powerful beings from the stars, gifting a primitive people with advanced technology and cosmic knowledge. But tonight, we will explore a different story. A story that is, in its own way, even more magical. It is the story of human ingenuity, of patient observation, and of a profound connection to the cosmos that required no help from other worlds. Our guide on this journey will not be a spaceship, but a single, magnificent and often overlooked piece of stone, an ancient star map that holds the key to understanding the mind of the pyramid builders. This quiet space is built by our community of listeners. If you find a sense of peace and wonder in these stories, a simple like or subscribe is a deeply appreciated gesture of support. And as always, I am fascinated to know where in the world this story is finding you. A comment with your city and time is a welcome thread, connecting us across the quiet hours of the night. Now, let the noise and the certainty of your world begin to fade. Settle into your comfort. We are about to enter a temple of stone and starlight, to read a map of the heavens, and to uncover the very human truth behind another worldly achievement. Our story begins, not on the Giza Plateau with its colossal monuments, but 250 miles to the south, in a place of even greater religious significance for the later Egyptians. We arrive at the Temple of Hathor at Dendera. It is a magnificent, sprawling complex, built not in the age of the pyramids, but much later, during the time of the Ptolemies and the Romans. But it is a temple built in the ancient style, a place that is a library of millennia of Egyptian religious and scientific thought. Let us imagine it not as a sun-bleached ruin, but as it was in its prime. A living, breathing, sacred space. To pass through its great stone pylons was to leave the chaotic, sunlit world of the living and to enter a cool, dark and highly ordered replica of the cosmos. The floors were the sacred earth. The great, papyrus-shaped columns were the plants that sprang from that earth. And the ceilings, high in the incense-filled gloom, were the sky. They were painted a deep celestial blue and covered in a glittering carpet of golden five-pointed stars. The temple was not just a place of worship, it was a functioning model of the universe. The priests who moved through its silent, echoing halls were not just holy men, they were a unique kind of scientist. Their science was a sacred one. Its purpose was not to conquer nature, but to understand and to maintain the divine cosmic order they called Ma'at. And the most important tool for understanding and maintaining this order was astronomy. The Egyptians were patient and brilliant astronomers. For thousands of years they watched the sky. They tracked the slow, majestic procession of the sun. They charted the complex, looping dance of the moon and the planets. And they watched the slow, eternal turning of the fixed stars. This was not a hobby. It was a state-sponsored, religious, and deeply practical science. The rising of the star Sirius, for example, perfectly predicted the annual, life-giving flood of the Nile. The sky was a clock, a calendar, and a sacred text, and the priests were its dedicated readers. Our journey now takes us deep into the heart of the Dendera temple, into a small, quiet chapel on its roof, a place dedicated to the god Osiris and used for the New Year's festival, a time of cosmic renewal. And we look up. There, on the ceiling, carved into two massive sandstone slabs, is the artifact that will be our guide. The Dendera Zodiac. It is one of the most beautiful and most important objects ever created by the ancient Egyptians. It is a great circular map of the heavens. At its centre are the northern constellations as the Egyptians saw them. The most prominent is the hippopotamus goddess, Taweret, representing our Draco, and the foreleg of a bull representing the Big Dipper. These are the circumpolar stars, the ones that never set, the eternal, undying stars that they called the Immortals. Surrounding this central panel is a great circular band, and on this band are the 12 figures of the zodiac. The ram, the bull, the twins, the crab. They are a scientific and cultural import, a sign of the deep intellectual cross-pollination that was happening in this late period of Egyptian history, a blending of their own ancient astronomy with the more mathematical systems of the Babylonians and the Greeks. The entire map is held aloft by figures representing the four corners of the sky and is surrounded by the 36 decans, the star groups that the Egyptians used to mark the hours of the night. It is a complete and breathtakingly complex picture of their cosmos, a perfect fusion of science, of art, and of religion. And it holds a secret, a quiet truth, that will unravel the modern myth of alien architects and reveal the true genius of the pyramid builders. We stand now, in the quiet, suspended time of our journey, within the small rooftop chapel of the Temple of Hathor at Dendera. The great festive crowds are a distant memory, the city of the living a world away. Here, in the cool, incense-scented darkness, there is only the profound silence of the stone and the ghostly silver light of the Egyptian stars filtering through the high, narrow openings in the walls. Above us is our guide, our text for the evening, the great circular star map, the Dendera zodiac. Let us truly look at it, not with the quick passing glance of the modern tourist, but with the slow, patient, and reverent gaze of an ancient priest. The figures carved into the sandstone are not mere decorations. They are the living, breathing characters of the cosmic drama, the divine entities who govern the turning of time and the fate of the world. In the soft, flickering light of a single oil lamp, the figures seem to move with a subtle, geological slowness. The great hippopotamus goddess at the centre, her body a map of the eternal, undying stars, seems to float in a celestial river. The 12 figures of the zodiac, the ram, the bull, the lion, are caught in a silent, endless procession, a majestic and unceasing dance around the pole. To look upon this ceiling is not to look at a map, it is to look into the very face of the cosmos as the Egyptians understood it. It is an act of communion. But this beautiful and deeply sacred object holds a secret that is not mythological, but profoundly scientific. A secret that, when understood, unlocks the entire mystery of the pyramids and quietly, but completely, refutes the modern fantasy of alien architects. The secret is not in what the map shows, but in the knowledge of time that it reveals. The zodiac is not just a picture of the sky, it is a map of deep time, a concept so vast it is almost beyond our own, hurried comprehension. The key to this secret is a subtle and almost imperceptible movement of the heavens, a great, slow wobble of the Earth itself. Imagine our planet spinning on its axis like a perfect, spinning top. But it is not perfect. As it spins, it has a slow, majestic, and almost drunken wobble. The axis itself, the imaginary line running through the north and south poles, does not point to a single, fixed spot in the heavens. Instead, it slowly, over an immense and almost unimaginable span of time, traces a great slow circle in the sky. This is the precession of the equinoxes, and its effects are profound. Firstly, it means that the North Star, our celestial anchor, changes. Today, our North Pole points almost directly at the star Polaris. Their North Star, the still point around which their entire universe seemed to turn, was a faint star in the constellation we call Draco, the dragon. The star's name was Thuban. The heavens themselves, the very map of the eternal, are not, in fact, eternal. They are in a constant, slow state of flux. The second effect of this great cosmic wobble is even more subtle and even more significant. As the Earth wobbles, the position of the sun on the first day of spring, the vernal equinox, as seen against the backdrop of the distant, fixed constellations of the zodiac, slowly and inexorably drifts backwards. For roughly 2,000 years, the sun will rise in the constellation of Pisces on the spring equinox. Before that, for 2,000 years, it rose in Aries. This slow, backward march through the 12 houses of the zodiac is the Great Year, a single cosmic day that is almost 26,000 years long. To know of this procession is to know the deepest and most secret of all the celestial clocks. It is a knowledge that could not possibly be gained in a single lifetime, or even in a single century. To detect this infinitesimally slow drift, a civilization would have to maintain a tradition of precise, meticulous, and carefully recorded astronomical observation for thousands of years. It would require a priesthood, a class of scholar scientists who could pass their knowledge down from one generation to the next with an almost religious devotion to accuracy. It is the ultimate test of a civilization's scientific patience and its cultural continuity. And the Dendera zodiac is the irrefutable proof that the ancient Egyptians and the Mesopotamian cultures with whom they shared this knowledge possessed this profound and hard-won secret. The zodiac is not just a pretty picture, it is a sophisticated astronomical computer. But more importantly, the very structure of the map, its division into the 12 houses of the zodiac, its careful notation of the sun's position relative to the constellations, is a model designed specifically to understand and to track the great, slow, and majestic turning of the precessional clock. So how does this quiet, scholarly fact, this piece of ancient astronomical science, prove that aliens didn't build the pyramids? The argument is a simple and devastatingly powerful one. The theory of the alien builders is predicated on the idea of a gift. It imagines a scenario where a powerful and technologically advanced alien race descended from the heavens and gave a primitive, Stone Age people a sudden and miraculous infusion of advanced knowledge. They gave them the secrets of engineering, of mathematics, of astronomy. But a gift of knowledge would look very different from what we see in the Dendera zodiac. An alien data dump would be perfect, static, and complete. It would be a flawless and timeless star chart. The knowledge of precession, however, is a knowledge that, by its very nature, cannot be given as a single instantaneous gift. It can only be earned. It can only be discovered slowly, painstakingly, and patiently through the long and often tedious human process of observation, of record keeping, of noticing the tiny, almost imperceptible changes, and of passing that knowledge down from one generation to the next for millennia. The knowledge of the Great Year is not a photograph, it is a time-lapse film, and the only camera that could have taken it was the long, unbroken, and deeply human tradition of the Egyptian priesthood. Furthermore, the Dendera zodiac is not a sterile, alien, and purely scientific document. It is a messy, a beautiful, a complex, and a profoundly human one. It is a cultural artifact. It shows a clear and fascinating blend of different and evolving traditions. At its very centre are the old and purely native Egyptian constellations, the hippopotamus goddess, the falcon, the leg of the bull. But surrounding them are the 12 figures of the zodiac, the ram, the twins, the scorpion, which were a later and foreign import, a system of celestial organization that the Egyptians borrowed from the Babylonians and then synthesized with the mathematical ideas of the Greeks. This is not what a gift from a perfect alien intelligence would look like. Aliens would not deliver a culturally blended syncretic star map filled with the evolving and sometimes contradictory ideas of different human cultures. They would deliver a single, pure, and universal truth. The Dendera zodiac is not a perfect alien data chart. It is a beautiful and deeply human collage. It is the record of a living, breathing, and constantly evolving intellectual tradition. A tradition that was confident enough to borrow ideas from its neighbours and to weave them into its own ancient tapestry of belief. And this beautiful and undeniable evidence of a long and slow and purely human scientific journey is the key that unlocks the mystery of the pyramids. The builders of the Great Pyramid, 2,000 years before the Dendera zodiac was carved, were not the recipients of a sudden alien gift. They were the inheritors of this same ancient and deeply human tradition of astronomical observation. They were the masters of a science that had already been developing for millennia. They did not need alien lasers to quarry their stones. They had the almost inexhaustible power of organized and deeply motivated human labor. And they did not need alien computers to align their monument to the stars. They had something far more powerful. They had the accumulated and sacred knowledge of 100 generations of their own human ancestors. They had the quiet and patient and brilliant wisdom that is earned, not given, by looking up at the night sky, night after night, century after century, until you finally and beautifully begin to understand its secrets. As you lie here, letting your own busy mind begin to slow, let go of the exciting and ultimately dehumanizing fantasy of the alien builders. The image of a long, unbroken chain of human beings stretching back into the mists of prehistory, a chain of quiet and patient observers, a chain of priests, of sky watchers, of men and women who, with no tools but their own naked eyes and their own magnificent and inquisitive minds, were able to decipher the deepest and the slowest of all the cosmic rhythms. The Dendera zodiac is not a monument to an alien visitation. It is a monument to them, to their patience, to their intelligence, and to their deep and enduring and profoundly human faith in the power of quiet and relentless observation. Let the silent, majestic turning of that great cosmic clock be the rhythm that now guides you, gently and peacefully, into your own deep and restorative sleep. And so, we leave the quiet rooftop chapel at Dendera, the beautiful and talkative star map now etched into our understanding. We carry its secret with us, the key of deep processional time, and we journey back 2,000 years earlier to the Giza Plateau. We return to the moment of the pyramid's completion, but we are no longer just a simple awestruck pilgrim. We are now armed with a new and profound insight into the minds of the men who built this magnificent and enigmatic structure. We are beginning to understand the why that lies behind the breathtaking how. Let us stand once more at the base of the Great Pyramid of Khufu, not as it is today, a weathered and romantic ruin, but as it was then, a perfect, seamless and blindingly white mountain of polished Tura limestone, its peak crowned with a pyramidion of shining golden electrum. It is a vision of geometric perfection, a pure and abstract mathematical form imposed upon the chaotic landscape of the earth. And it is this very perfection, this almost inhuman precision, that has so often been used as evidence for an alien intelligence. But with the knowledge of the Dendera zodiac, with the understanding of the Egyptians' mastery of deep astronomical time, we can now see this precision not as an alien gift, but as a human necessity. It is a machine designed to function not just in the physical world, but in the spiritual and celestial realms as well. And for a machine of this kind to function, its calibration must be absolute. Consider its most famous and most baffling feature, its perfect alignment to the cardinal points. The four sides of the Great Pyramid are aligned to true north, south, east and west, with an accuracy that is, in some cases, better than 1/10 of a degree. This is a feat of surveying that would be a challenge even for modern engineers with their lasers and their GPS satellites. How did they achieve it? The alien theorists propose that it was a set of coordinates, a beacon for a landing craft. But the truth, as revealed by the Egyptians' own astronomical knowledge, is far more profound and far more beautiful. They did not need alien technology. They needed only their patient and brilliant observation of the stars. Let us imagine the stretching of the cord, ceremony, the sacred and highly precise ritual that marked the foundation of any great temple. The chief priest, the master architect, would wait for a specific night, a night of perfect, cloudless clarity. He would stand, with his assistants, on the flattened and perfectly levelled ground of the Giza Plateau, and he would watch the northern sky. He would watch the eternal and undying circumpolar stars as they wheeled around the still and sacred point of the celestial pole. He would choose two bright stars on opposite sides of the pole, and he would mark, with a simple plumb-bob-weighted line, the exact moment that one star rose in the east and the other set in the west. He would then bisect the angle between these 2 points. And in that simple, elegant and perfectly repeatable act of observational geometry, he would have his true north. A north that was not based on the shifting and unreliable magnetic field of the Earth, but a north that was anchored to the very fabric of the cosmos itself. The pyramid's alignment is not a technological boast. It is a theological statement. It is a declaration that this monument is not just a random structure on the earth, but a building that is in perfect and harmonious alignment with the fundamental and divine structure of the universe. It is an act of knitting the sacred geography of the earth together with the sacred geography of the heavens. And now let us consider the other, even more mysterious, alignments of the pyramid. The small, strange, and precisely angled shafts that lead from the deep internal chambers, the so-called King's and Queen's chambers, out through hundreds of feet of solid masonry to the face of the pyramid. They are not ventilation shafts. They are too small, and they were originally sealed at both ends. They are not random, they are precisely targeted sightlines. From the king's chamber, the northern shaft points directly to the pole star of that era, the faint star Thuban in the constellation of Draco. This was the Egyptians' gateway to eternity. The circumpolar stars were the immortals, the ones that never died by dipping below the horizon. This shaft was a direct and one-way launch tube for the soul of the dead king, a spiritual cannon designed to fire his immortal bar, his soul essence, directly to its rightful place among the undying and eternal gods. The southern shaft from the king's chamber points to a different and equally significant target. It points to the belt of the constellation we call Orion. To the Egyptians, this was the celestial manifestation of the great god Osiris, the king of the underworld, the god of resurrection. This shaft was the pathway that would allow the dead king, now identified with Osiris, to join the great god on his eternal journey across the night sky. The shafts are not a mystery to be solved with modern physics. They are a profoundly beautiful and deeply logical piece of spiritual technology based on a perfect and hard-won understanding of the celestial map. They are the conduits of a resurrection machine. They will argue that this knowledge of the stars, this complex theology, was itself the gift of the aliens. They will say that the story of Osiris is a folk memory of a real, historical being from another planet. But the Dendera zodiac and the thousands of years of human intellectual history it represents provides a quiet and devastating counter-argument. The Egyptian religion was not a static and perfect dogma delivered from on high. It was a living, breathing, and constantly evolving thing. The gods of the Pyramid Age were not the same as the gods of the later periods. The rituals changed. The theology grew more complex. The story of Osiris himself, a story of death and of resurrection, was a story that resonated so deeply with the Egyptians precisely because it mirrored their own, deeply human, experience of the world. It was a story that was born from the annual and miraculous death of the land under the summer sun and its resurrection by the life-giving and redemptive flood of the Nile. The Egyptian worldview was not an import from another star system. It was a product of the soil, of the river, of the sun, and of the sky of Egypt itself. It was a deeply terrestrial and profoundly human attempt to find meaning in the great and beautiful and sometimes terrifying cycles of their own unique world. The pyramids, then, are not a monument to an alien visitation. They are a monument to the power of a human idea. An idea so powerful that it could command the labor of a nation for a century. An idea so precise that it could align 1,000,000 tons of stone with a distant star. An idea so audacious that it sought to conquer the final and most terrifying of all human frontiers, death itself. As you lie here on the edge of your own nightly journey into the quiet and mysterious world of sleep, let the true and deeply human purpose of the pyramids settle in your mind. Let go of the cold and ultimately unsatisfying fantasy of the alien machine, and embrace the far more magical and more inspiring reality of the human dream. Imagine the mind of the ancient architect, a man without a computer, without a textbook, without a laser level. Imagine him standing under the vast and silent and star-dusted canopy of the desert sky. Imagine him through a lifetime of patient and reverent observation, learning the secret names of the stars, the hidden pathways of the gods. And then imagine him having the sheer and breathtaking audacity to say, "I will build a mountain of stone, and I will make it a perfect and eternal and functional map of this heaven. I will build a machine that can turn my mortal king into an immortal god." The real miracle of the pyramids is not that aliens came down from the sky and built them. The real miracle is that human beings, with their own two hands and their own magnificent and inquisitive minds, had the courage to build their own man-made star and to place it on the earth as a permanent and shining testament to their own indomitable and celestial ambition. This is a story that is far grander, far more inspiring, and far more deeply and beautifully human. Having established the profound and deeply human astronomical knowledge that served as the pyramid's blueprint, let us now turn our attention from the heavens to the earth. Let us explore the physical, logistical, and engineering reality of the construction. It is here, in the dust, the sweat, and the sheer, brutal physicality of the work, that the myth of alien technology finds its most popular and most persistent arguments. And it is here that a closer and more patient look at the evidence reveals a story of human ingenuity that is, in its own way, as astonishing as any tale of extraterrestrial intervention. The central question, the one that has fueled 1,000 speculative books and television shows, is a simple one: how did they move the stones? The Great Pyramid is composed of an estimated 2.3 million blocks of stone, most of them limestone, weighing an average of 2.5 tons each. The great granite slabs that form the roof of the king's chamber, however, weigh up to 80 tons apiece and were quarried in Aswan, over 500 miles to the south. How could a Stone Age and Bronze Age culture, a culture without the wheel for transport, without iron tools, without modern cranes and machinery, possibly have accomplished such a colossal feat of logistics and engineering? The alien theorists provide a simple and seductive answer: they didn't. They propose that the aliens used advanced technologies, sonic levitation, anti-gravity devices, or perhaps even a form of concrete, a geopolymer, that was simply cast into molds on site. These theories are exciting, they are dramatic, and they have one great advantage: they require very little evidence, and they bypass all of the difficult and complex questions of human labour and ingenuity. But the evidence on the ground, the quiet and often overlooked clues left behind by the builders themselves, tells a very different and a very human story. Let us first journey to the quarries. Not to the distant granite quarries of Aswan, but to the vast limestone quarries that lie just a few hundred yards to the south of the Giza Plateau itself. The majority of the pyramid's core blocks were not transported over vast distances, they were quarried right next door. The Giza Plateau is, in fact, a vast and conveniently located geological shelf of high-quality limestone. The builders did not choose the site at random, they chose it because the raw materials were already there. Let us imagine ourselves in this ancient quarry. It is not a scene of high-tech, laser-like precision. It is a scene of organised and highly skilled human labour. We see teams of men, their bronze bodies gleaming with sweat, working on the rock face. They are not cutting the great blocks out with giant saws. They are using a simple and brilliant technique of channeling and leverage. A master quarryman, using a simple plumb line and a set square, marks out the dimensions of a new block on the surface of the rock. Then, a team of workers, using heavy, rounded dolerite pounders, a type of stone that is much harder than the limestone, begins to hammer out a deep, narrow trench or channel around the marked block. It is a slow, percussive and physically demanding process. Once the block is isolated on 3 sides, the most ingenious part of the process begins. The workers cut a series of small V-shaped holes along the base of the block. They then hammer a series of dry wooden wedges into these holes, and then they pour water onto the wedges, and they wait. The process that happens next is not one of advanced alien technology. It is a process of simple and inexorable natural physics. The dry wood of the wedges absorbs the water. As it absorbs the water, it expands, and it expands with a slow and utterly irresistible force. The combined pressure of dozens of these swelling wooden wedges exerts a force of thousands of pounds per square inch along the base of the stone block. After a few hours, with a great groaning crack that echoes through the quarry, the multi-ton block of limestone splits, cleanly and perfectly, from the bedrock. There are no lasers. There is no anti-gravity. There is only the simple, patient and brilliant application of a deep and hard-won understanding of the properties of wood, of water and of stone. Now, the block must be moved. And this is where the second great mystery and the second great human innovation comes into play. The block is levered, using great wooden beams onto a massive wooden sledge. And then, a great team of men, perhaps 100 of them, begins to haul the sledge on a specially prepared causeway from the quarry to the construction site. But they do not just haul with brute force. The friction of a multi-ton sledge on dry sand would be almost impossible to overcome, and so they employ another, simple and ingenious, solution. A man walks in front of the sledge with a simple clay pot of water, and he pours the water onto the sand just in front of the runners. Recent archaeological experiments have proven what the ancient Egyptians knew through a process of pure, practical, and on-the-job discovery. The right amount of water, not too little and not too much, on sand reduces the coefficient of friction by a staggering amount. It makes the sand firm, and the sledge glides over it with a relative and almost miraculous ease. The great and seemingly superhuman feat of moving these colossal stones was not achieved by a secret alien technology. It was achieved by a very public and very human technology, a technology of simple but brilliant insights into the fundamental laws of physics. And what of the great granite blocks from Aswan, the ones that weighed 80 tons? The process was the same, but on a much larger scale. They were quarried with the same patient dolerite pounding technique. They were moved to the banks of the Nile, and then they were loaded onto immense, specially constructed barges to be floated with the current of the Great River 500 miles to the north. The loading of an 80-ton block onto a boat, using only levers and ropes and earthen ramps, is a feat of engineering that is almost beyond our comprehension. But it is not a feat that requires a technology beyond our own understanding of physics. It requires a level of social organization, of collective will, and of a deep and almost fearless confidence in their own abilities. That is perhaps the most alien thing of all about this ancient culture. As you lie here, on the edge of sleep, let the popular and ultimately lazy image of the anti-gravity beam fade from your mind. Replace it with a different and far more powerful and far more human image, the image of a man with a dolerite pounder, patiently and rhythmically chipping away at a channel in the stone. The image of a man with a clay pot of water, carefully and intelligently wetting the sand. The image of 100 men chanting in unison, their bodies a single, powerful and perfectly coordinated engine hauling a mountain of stone across the desert. The story of the moving of the stones is not a story of alien intervention. It is a story of human ingenuity at its most pragmatic, its most patient, and its most brilliant. It is a story that reminds us that the greatest and most powerful technologies are not always the most complex. Sometimes they are the simple and elegant and deeply intelligent solutions that are born from a long and intimate and respectful conversation with the real and material world. Let that quiet and deeply satisfying thought be the foundation upon which you now build your own peaceful and restorative sleep. Having witnessed the elegant and profoundly human solutions to the problem of quarrying and moving the colossal stones, our journey now takes us to the final and most daunting of all the engineering challenges, the raising of the pyramid. It is one thing to move a multi-ton block across a flat prepared surface. It is another thing entirely to lift it, course by perfect course, to a height of nearly 500 feet. It is this vertical challenge, more than any other, that seems to demand a non-human and otherworldly explanation. The image of 2.5 million blocks of stone, rising into the sky with a watchmaker's precision, feels less like a construction project and more like an act of planetary magic. The alien theorists, once again, provide a simple and dramatic solution: levitation. Beams of energy, tractor beams, sonic devices that negated the force of gravity. In their narrative, the stones were not lifted, they were simply floated into place, a clean, effortless, and technologically triumphant process. It is a compelling vision, but it is one that is utterly devoid of any supporting evidence on the ground. The evidence that does exist, the subtle clues left in the archaeological record and in the very fabric of the pyramid itself, points to a solution that is, once again, messier, more laborious, and far more ingeniously human. The key to the puzzle, the great, and now vanished secret of the pyramid's construction, was the ramp. We know from ancient depictions of other, smaller construction projects, and from the sheer pragmatic logic of the problem, that the Egyptians used ramps to lift their great stones. But the exact nature of the pyramid's ramp system is the single greatest and most fiercely debated mystery in all of Egyptology. Let us explore the possibilities, not as a dry academic debate, but as a journey through the minds of the ancient architects. The first, and most obvious, solution is a single, long and straight ramp leading from the ground directly to the ever-rising summit of the pyramid. This is the image that is often depicted in popular films and illustrations. But as we stand here in our imagined past and we apply the simple and unforgiving laws of physics, we quickly realize the impossibility of this solution. To be usable, a ramp for hauling multi-ton sledges cannot be too steep. A slope of about 8 degrees is considered the practical and sustainable limit. To reach the 480-foot summit of the Great Pyramid with a ramp of this gentle slope would require a ramp that was over a mile long. The construction of such a ramp would be a project even more colossal than the pyramid itself. It would require more material, more labour and more time. It is a solution that is, in its own way, even more unbelievable than the problem it is trying to solve. The ancient and deeply pragmatic Egyptian architects would have understood this. They would have known that this was not the path. So what was the alternative? The evidence points to a more sophisticated and far more elegant solution. A ramp, or a system of ramps, that somehow hugged the body of the pyramid itself, growing upwards with the monument. Let us imagine one of the leading theories. In this model, the ramp would begin at the base and would then wrap its way around the 4 faces of the pyramid, like the stripes on a candy cane, rising ever upwards. It would allow for a continuous and efficient flow of traffic, with empty sledges being returned down a separate parallel ramp. We can almost see it in our mind's eye. The great white and growing body of the pyramid, encircled by this bustling temporary and mud brick artery. We can see the teams of haulers, their bodies straining in the sun, as they make the long, slow and spiralling ascent to the summit. But this theory too has its problems. A ramp of this kind would have obscured the 4 faces of the pyramid, making it impossible for the surveyors to maintain the precise and absolutely critical geometric angles of the structure as it grew. How could you ensure the 4 faces would meet at a perfect point if you could not see them? For a culture as obsessed with geometric and astronomical precision as the ancient Egyptians, this seems like a fatal flaw. And so, we are led to another, even more subtle, and in recent years more compelling theory. The internal ramp. This is a radical and beautiful idea. It proposes that the primary ramp was not built on the outside of the pyramid, but on the inside. Let us imagine this. After the first, lower courses of the pyramid were built, creating a solid and massive base, the builders would have left a large and gently sloping tunnel, a void, within the body of the pyramid itself. This great internal corridor would then serve as the primary ramp, spiraling its way upwards just inside the outer casing of the monument. The stones would be brought to the base of the pyramid. They would then be hauled into the structure, up this dark, torch-lit and echoing internal causeway to the level of the current construction. Once the pyramid was complete, this internal ramp would simply be sealed and left, a hidden and eternal secret, a ghostly memory of the construction process, locked within the very heart of the finished monument. This theory is breathtaking in its elegance. It solves the problem of the surveying, as the outer faces of the pyramid would have remained clear and visible throughout the entire construction process. It is also incredibly efficient, as the ramp would be built from the pyramid's own core blocks, requiring very little additional material. Is there any evidence for such a fantastic idea? The evidence is subtle, but it is tantalizing. Modern, non-invasive surveys of the Great Pyramid, using techniques like microgravimetry and infrared thermography, have detected strange anomalies within the structure, patterns of lower density that could, possibly, be interpreted as a great and still hidden internal ramp. The recently discovered Big Void, the great hidden chamber above the Grand Gallery, has given new life to the idea that the pyramid still holds deep and profound structural secrets. But whether the ramp was internal or external, or some complex combination of the two, the fundamental truth remains the same. The Egyptians solved the problem of the vertical, not with a single, magical and alien technology, but with a system. A complex and brilliantly conceived system of human labour, of simple machines, and of a profound and practical understanding of geometry and physics. They did not need to levitate the stones. They just needed to find a very, very clever and a very, very patient way to drag them up a hill. As you lie here, on the edge of sleep, allow your own busy mind to find a state of quiet. Let go of the need for a single and simple answer. and instead let yourself feel a deep and profound sense of awe for the human mind that created this puzzle. Imagine the mind of the great and anonymous architect, the man the texts call Hemiunu. Imagine him not with a laser gun, but with a simple papyrus scroll and a reed pen. Imagine him, through a process of pure and brilliant and deeply human thought, sketching out the plans, calculating the angles, and solving in his own mind the greatest and most ambitious engineering challenge in human history. The true and most enduring monument of Giza is not the pyramid of stone that we see. It is the invisible and far more magnificent pyramid of human thought that was required to build it. The solution to the great mystery of the pyramid is not that the builders were not human. It is that they were more human, more patient, more ingenious, and more bound together by a single and unshakable purpose than we can easily, in our own distracted and fragmented world, allow ourselves to imagine. Having ascended the great, and now invisible, ramp, whether it was a spiralling external causeway or a hidden internal tunnel, we arrive at the final and most breathtakingly precise stage of the construction process. For years, perhaps for more than a decade, the Giza Plateau has been dominated by the sight of a great and growing stepped pyramid. The core blocks, quarried locally, have been hauled and levered into place, creating the raw and powerful and brutally functional inner mountain of the monument. But this is just the skeleton. The final and most sacred act is to give the pyramid its skin, a perfect, seamless and brilliantly white robe of polished Tura limestone. This is the work that will transform the monument from a feat of brute force engineering into a work of sublime and almost supernatural art. And it is a work that requires a level of skill, of patience, and of a deep and almost cellular understanding of the material that is perhaps the most difficult for our modern, machine-oriented minds to comprehend. We travel to the eastern bank of the river, to the great underground galleries of the Tura quarries. This is a different kind of quarry from the open-air pits at Giza. Here, the limestone is of a different quality. It is finer-grained, purer, and of a brilliant, almost snow-like white. It is the most prized building material in the entire kingdom, reserved for the most sacred of purposes. And it is quarried not from the surface, but from deep within the earth, in a series of vast, man-made caverns, to protect it from the cracks and the impurities caused by the sun and the weather. We stand in one of these great, silent, subterranean halls. The air is cool and still, and the only sound is the rhythmic and almost musical chink, chink, chink of the masons' copper chisels on the stone. They are not using brute force, dolerite pounders here. They are using a more delicate and more precise set of tools. They are freeing the great casing blocks from the living rock with a skill that is more akin to sculpture than to quarrying. Each block is a masterpiece of the mason's art. It is cut not as a simple rectangular cuboid, but as a complex and highly precise geometric form. The inner face of the block is left vertical, to fit snugly against the core structure of the pyramid. But the outer face is cut at a precise and unvarying angle, the sacred angle of the pyramid slope, approximately 52 degrees. And the top and bottom surfaces are not flat. They are cut with a slight and almost imperceptible inward slope, a feature that will lock the stones together and direct the immense downward pressure of the monument inwards towards its central core, increasing its stability. These stones are then transported, with an almost religious care, to the river. They are loaded onto the great barges and ferried across the Nile to the Giza harbour, and then begins their final, slow and sacred ascent up the great ramp to the ever-rising summit of the pyramid. Now we are back at the construction site. A great, white Tura limestone casing block, weighing perhaps 15 tons, has reached the top of the ramp, the current working level of the pyramid, and now begins the most delicate and most dangerous of all the operations, the setting of the stone. The masons at the top are a different breed. They are the absolute elite, the master craftsmen of the kingdom. They are working on a high and windy and terrifyingly exposed platform hundreds of feet above the ground. A single misstep, a single moment of inattention means a swift and certain death. They do not use a crane to swing the great block into place. They use a system of immense and incredibly strong wooden levers and pivots. With a series of quiet, guttural commands, and with a coordination that seems almost telepathic, they begin to nudge, to pivot, to slide the great 15-ton block towards its final, designated position. The movements are infinitesimally small, a fraction of an inch at a time. The final fitting is a work of breathtaking precision. The block must fit perfectly against its neighbours on all four sides. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus, writing 2,000 years after the pyramid was built, was told by the Egyptian priests that the casing stones were fitted so perfectly that you could not insert a single sheet of paper between them. And modern archaeology has proven that this was not an exaggeration. How did they achieve this? They did not have diamond-tipped saws or laser-guided cutting tools. They had a simple and profoundly effective technology. They would coat the face of the already laid stone with a thin layer of red ochre dust. They would then offer up the new stone, pressing it against the marked face. When they pulled it away, the high spots on the new stone, the points of contact, would be marked with a faint red blush. And then began the slow, patient and almost meditative work of abrasion. The masons would take a block of dolerite and they would begin to rub, to grind, to slowly and painstakingly remove the high spots from the new stone. They would then offer the stone up again. More red marks would appear, and they would grind again. This process would be repeated again and again for hours, or even for days, for a single stone. It is a process that is so labour-intensive, so mind-numbingly repetitive, that it is almost beyond the comprehension of our modern, efficiency-obsessed culture. It is a process that requires a level of patience, of perfectionism, of a deep and almost loving devotion to the material that we have almost completely lost. And this is another and more profound reason why the alien theory is so fundamentally unsatisfying. An alien, with their advanced technology, would have achieved this precision easily. It would have been a simple and almost trivial act of manufacturing, but in its very ease, it would have been meaningless. For the Egyptian masons, the perfection was not the goal, it was the process. The slow, patient, and almost impossibly difficult act of achieving that perfection was a form of prayer. It was a ritual of purification. It was a way of offering their own human and imperfect labour, and through that offering, of creating a thing of perfect and divine and eternal beauty. The meaning was not in the finished product. It was in the struggle, in the effort, in the deep and human and sacred act of the making. Finally, the stone is perfect. It is levered for the last time into its final resting place. It settles with a soft and deeply satisfying sigh of stone on stone. The fit is absolute. The seam is almost invisible. Another small piece of the sacred white and geometric God has been born. This process is repeated thousands upon thousands of times until the entire vast and stepped surface of the core pyramid is covered. The final act is the placement of the pyramidion, the golden capstone, which we have already witnessed. And then, one final and almost forgotten task remains. Teams of men, suspended on ropes from the summit, would spend months, perhaps even years, rubbing the white limestone with fine, grained rubbing stones and a slurry of water and abrasive sand, until the entire monument was not just white, but gleamed with a finish as smooth and as reflective as polished marble. It is this final, almost insane act of communal perfectionism that would have created the final and most breathtaking effect of all. The Great Pyramid, in its finished state, would have been a true and dazzling and almost unbearable miracle of light. It would have been a beacon, a man-made mountain of pure and blazing and reflected sunlight, visible from the mountains of the Sinai, and perhaps, it was believed, even from the moon. It was a symbol of the sun god, Ra, brought down to earth, a permanent and shining and eternal promise of the divine light. As you lie here on the very edge of sleep, let the true and deeply human story of the pyramid's creation fill your mind. Let go of the fantasy of the laser beams and the anti-gravity ships, and embrace the far more powerful and far more inspiring reality of the human hand and the human heart. Imagine the quiet and almost fanatical focus of the mason as he rubs his stone again and again, searching for that one final and perfect point of contact. Imagine the courage of the men suspended on their ropes hundreds of feet in the air, patiently polishing a mountain. and imagine the collective and unshakable will of a people who believed, with every fibre of their being, that this work, this hard and slow and often painful work, was the most important and the most sacred and the most beautiful thing that a human being could ever do. The pyramids were not built by aliens, they were built by artists, and the material they were working with was not just stone, it was faith. We have stood in awe before the colossal scale of the pyramid. We have marvelled at the brilliant and profoundly human ingenuity of its construction. We have traced the celestial alignments in its star shafts and deciphered the deep astronomical knowledge encoded in its very foundations. We have answered, in a human and satisfying way, the great and enduring question of how they built it. But now we must turn to the even deeper and more mysterious question, the question of why. Why would a civilization dedicate such a staggering and almost incomprehensible amount of its wealth, its resources, its time, and its very life force to the construction of a single, colossal, and seemingly useless stone monument? The simple and often repeated answer is that it was a tomb, a grand and deeply egotistical monument to the vanity of a single, all-powerful king. It is to look at a great cathedral and to see only a very large and inefficiently designed storage shed for a single important corpse. The Great Pyramid was a tomb, yes. But it was so much more. It was a resurrection machine. It was a gateway to the stars. It was a cosmic engine. And it was a profound and deeply necessary act of national and cosmic preservation. To understand this, we must strip away our own modern and deeply pessimistic understanding of death. In our world, death is an ending, a final and often terrifying cessation of being. To the ancient Egyptians, this was not the case. Death was not an ending, it was a transition. It was a perilous and difficult and deeply dangerous journey from one state of being to another, from the world of the living to the eternal and far more real world of the gods. And the pyramid was the vessel, the sacred bark, that was designed to ensure that the most important soul in the kingdom, the soul of the divine pharaoh, could successfully navigate that dangerous journey. Let us explore the beautiful and complex spiritual anatomy of the Egyptian soul. They did not believe in a single, unified soul as we do. They believed that a human being was a complex and multifaceted spiritual entity composed of many different parts. There was the cat, the physical body, which had to be preserved through the sacred and highly scientific art of mummification to act as a permanent and necessary anchor for the spirit in the physical world. To have your name remembered, to have it spoken, to have it written down, was to continue to exist. To have your name forgotten was to be truly and utterly annihilated. This is why the monuments are covered in the names of the kings, a perpetual and magical act of remembrance. There was the Ib, the heart, which was believed to be the seat of intelligence, of emotion, of the conscience. This was the one major internal organ that was left in the body during mummification. For it was the heart that would be weighed, in the final judgment in the underworld, against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and order. If your heart was heavy with sin, it would outweigh the feather, and it would be devoured by a terrible crocodile-headed monster, and you would cease to exist. But if your heart was light and pure and true, you would be declared true of voice, and you would be allowed to enter the paradise of the afterlife. And then there were the two most important and most spiritual aspects of the soul. The bar was the closest to our own concept of a personality. It was the unique and individual essence of a person. It was often depicted as a human-headed bird, and it had the ability to travel between the world of the living and the world of the dead. It could fly out of the tomb during the day to visit the places it had loved in life, but it had to return each night to the safety of the mummified body. And finally, and most mysteriously, there was the K. The K was the life force. It was a kind of spiritual double, a celestial twin, that was created at the moment of a person's birth and which they would be reunited with at the moment of their death. The Ka was what required sustenance in the afterlife. It was the car that mystically consumed the essence of the food and drink offerings that were left in the tomb. To keep a person's car alive was to keep their spirit from starving in the next world. The pyramid was designed to be the perfect and eternal and absolutely secure home for all of these complex and interacting parts of the king's soul. It was a fortress to protect the physical body, the cat, from desecration. It was a great and permanent billboard to ensure that the king's name, his Ren, would be remembered forever. It was the stage upon which the great and final judgment of his heart, his Ib, would be successfully passed. And it was the eternal and perfectly provisioned palace from which his bar could travel and in which his car could be sustained for all of eternity. And this is another and more profound reason that the alien theory is so deeply unsatisfying. It seeks a physical and technological explanation for something that was, at its very core, a spiritual and a deeply and beautifully human technology. The builders were not concerned with the physics of space travel, they were concerned with the metaphysics of soul travel. Let us stand for a moment in the deep and absolute silence of the king's chamber at the very heart of the Great Pyramid. The air is cool and still, and has a strange, resonant quality. You are surrounded and enclosed by millions of tons of stone. You are in the most secure and the most isolated room on the planet, and you are at the very centre of the resurrection machine. You see the great and empty granite sarcophagus. This is where the cat, the royal mummy, would have rested, the physical anchor for all the other spiritual parts. You look up, and you know that above you, in the darkness, are the 5 great, stress-relieving chambers, built with colossal 80-ton granite beams, a masterpiece of engineering designed to protect this sacred space from the crushing weight of the mountain of stone above. And you see the small and rectangular openings of the star shafts. And with your new and hard-won knowledge, you understand them. You see the northern shaft, and you see it not as an air shaft, but as a divine and celestial cannon aimed with a perfect and unwavering precision at the eternal and undying circular stars. You can almost feel the moment when the king's bar, his personality soul, would be launched like a bird from a cage up this dark and narrow and secret pathway to its final and glorious home in the heavens. You see the southern shaft, and you see it as a sacred and resonant cord, connecting the dead king here in his earthly tomb with his celestial counterpart, the great god Osiris, in the constellation of Orion. It is a line of communication, a conduit of divine power that would ensure the king's successful resurrection and his rebirth as the new and eternal king of the underworld. The pyramid is not a dead and static tomb. It is a machine that is designed to be activated by the death of the king. It is a chrysalis, built of stone, and its purpose is to facilitate the most profound and most important of all the alchemical transformations, the transformation of a mortal man into an immortal god. Why was the king's personal and eternal salvation a matter of such vast and national importance? Because the king was not just a man, he was the linchpin of the entire cosmic order. He was the divine intermediary between the world of the gods and the world of humanity. If the king successfully made his journey to the afterlife, if he was successfully reborn as an immortal god, then he would be able to join the sun god, Ra, in his great solar barque, and he would sail with him across the sky each day, helping him to defeat the great serpent of chaos, Apep, each night. His successful transition to divinity was a guarantee of the sun's continued rising, of the Nile's continued flooding, of the continued stability and prosperity and divine favour of the entire land of Egypt. The pyramid was not an act of selfish and monumental arrogance. It was the ultimate and most necessary act of communal self-preservation. In building the king's stairway to heaven, the Egyptian people were building a bridge to their own, secure and prosperous future. It was a national insurance policy, written in stone, against the forces of chaos and darkness. It was the great and stabilizing anchor that moored the entire fragile and river-based civilization of Egypt to the eternal and unchanging bedrock of the cosmos. As you lie here now, at the end of this long day's journey, let the sheer and breathtaking ambition of this idea settle in your mind. Let go of the modern and cynical interpretation of the vain king and his suffering slaves, and embrace the far more complex and far more awe-inspiring reality of a civilization that was so deeply and so profoundly in conversation with the cosmos that they believed they could, and in fact had to, build a mountain of stone to help the sun to rise. The story of the pyramids is not a story about how to build a building. It is a story about how to build a universe. It is a story of a people who believed, with every fibre of their being, that the world was a delicate and meaningful and sacred work of art, and that it was their sacred and lifelong duty to be not just its inhabitants, but its co-creators and its eternal and vigilant guardians. We have stood in awe before the cosmic and theological purpose of the Great Pyramid. We have seen it as a resurrection machine, a celestial engine, a great stone anchor designed to moor an entire civilization to the eternal rhythms of the universe. But now we must turn our gaze from the heavens back to the earth. We must walk away from the shining, white and sacred monument and journey a few hundred yards to the south, to a place that is, in its own way, just as important and just as revolutionary as the pyramid itself. We must enter the world of the builders. For centuries, the story of the pyramid's construction was dominated by a single, powerful and deeply misleading image, an image given to us by the ancient Greek historian Herodotus. It was the image of 100,000 wretched slaves, labouring for 20 years under the lash of a cruel tyrant's whip, their lives as cheap and as expendable as the millions of stone blocks they were forced to move. It is a dramatic, a compelling, and a deeply moralistic story. And modern archaeology has proven that it is almost entirely false. Let us now enter the place that has rewritten this history, a place that was, for 4,500 years, buried and forgotten beneath the desert sands. It is not a single, miserable camp of temporary huts. It is a vast and highly organised and permanently established urban centre. It is one of the world's first planned cities, a sprawling metropolis with an estimated population of over 20,000 people, all dedicated to the single great purpose of the Giza building projects. It has streets, it has administrative buildings, it has industrial zones, and it has, most importantly, a complex and deeply human social structure. Let us walk its streets. In the lower part of the city, near the valley floor, are the great communal barracks. These are long, gallery-like buildings, made of mud brick, and they are where the bulk of the labour force, the seasonal, conscripted workers, were housed. And it is here that we find the first crucial piece of evidence that shatters the myth of the slave. Archaeologists excavating these barracks have unearthed a treasure trove of animal bones, the discarded refuse of the workers' daily meals. And these are not the bones of scavenger animals, or the cheapest, toughest cuts of meat. They are the bones of prime, young and healthy cattle. They are the remains of high-quality beef, a luxury that was far beyond the reach of the average peasant farmer in ancient Egypt. The workers were not just being fed, they were being well fed. They were being provided with a high-protein, high-energy diet, a diet that was specifically designed to fuel the immense and physically demanding labour they were required to perform. This is not how you treat slaves. You do not waste your most expensive and valuable source of protein on a disposable workforce. This is how you treat a valuable and highly respected national asset. This is how you treat a professional and conscripted army of builders. We move further into the city, up onto the higher ground, to a different kind of neighbourhood. Here, the buildings are not the long communal barracks. They are smaller, individual houses with their own courtyards, their own small gardens, their own bread ovens. This is where the permanent and more skilled workforce lived, the master masons, the artists, the scribes, the overseers, the men who were the year-round professional core of the project. This was a city with a middle class, a hierarchy of skill and status. And it is here that we find the second, and even more compelling, piece of evidence. Just beyond this residential district, on a small sandy hill, is the workers' cemetery. This in itself is a revolutionary discovery. They are not laid to rest in their own dedicated cemetery at the very foot of the sacred monument they are building. Their bodies are cast into anonymous pits. But here we have the graves of the pyramid builders, and their tombs are a perfect and deeply moving miniature echo of the great royal tombs they were constructing. We see small mud brick mastabas and even tiny, perfect miniature pyramids. The bodies are not just thrown into the ground, they are carefully buried, laid to rest on their sides, facing the west, the land of the dead, as was the custom. And they are buried with grave goods, simple clay pots that once held food and beer for the afterlife, a few personal and well-worn tools, a string of simple clay beads. These are not the treasures of a king, but they are the humble and deeply human possessions of a people who believed, just as their king did, in the reality of an eternal life. And the bones themselves tell a powerful and poignant story. They are the bones of both men and women, for this was a community of families. And they are the bones of people who worked incredibly and dangerously hard. The skeletons of the men show evidence of immense physical stress. The vertebrae of their lower backs are compressed and arthritic, the legacy of a lifetime of lifting and hauling immense weights. We see healed fractures of arms, of legs, of ribs, evidence of the frequent and often brutal accidents on the construction site. But we also see evidence of a level of medical care that is astonishing for the ancient world. We see bones that have been expertly set and have healed cleanly. We see evidence of amputations, of limbs that have been surgically removed and where the patient has survived for many years after the operation. This was not a workforce that was worked to death and then discarded. This was a workforce that was cared for, that was healed, that was valued. They were, in the most literal sense, the soldiers of a great national and religious war against time and chaos, and their well-being was a matter of state importance. The tombs also give us the one final and most beautiful piece of evidence. They give us the workers' own voices. The small tombs are often inscribed with simple and deeply personal graffiti. They give us the names of the men who were buried here, and they give us the names of their work gangs, the drunkards of Menkaure, the friends of Khufu. These are not the names of slave gangs. These are the proud and boisterous and deeply human names of competing teams, of fraternities, of men who took a deep and personal pride in their difficult and sacred work. They are the ancient and glorious equivalent of a modern construction crew, calling themselves the wrecking crew or the concrete kings. And so, the picture that emerges from the sands of Giza is not one of misery, but one of a complex and deeply human society. It was a life of incredibly hard and dangerous and often monotonous labour. It was a life of discipline, of a rigid hierarchy, of a profound and almost total dedication to a single overriding purpose. But it was also a life of community, a life of shared pride, a life of a deep and abiding sense of purpose. And it was a life that was lived, not in the shadow of a tyrant's whip, but in the light of a great and unifying and deeply sacred national dream. As you lie here now, on the edge of your own comfortable and modern sleep, let the old and lazy and deeply insulting image of the whipped slave finally fade from your mind. Replace it with a different and far more powerful and far more respectful image. Imagine a man. His name is Nefer, a man from a small and forgotten village in the Nile Delta. Imagine him at the end of a long and grueling day of hauling stones, his body aching, his hands raw. Imagine him not returning to a squalid and hopeless slave pit, but to a bustling and noisy and vibrant community of his peers. Imagine him sharing a meal of bread and beef and a good strong beer with the other men of his gang, the friends of Khufu. Imagine them laughing and boasting of the day's work, of the great stone they moved, of the perfect seam they laid. And then imagine him looking up from his meal and seeing the great and growing and beautiful white monument on the horizon, glowing in the last golden light of the setting sun. And imagine the feeling in his heart, a feeling of profound and weary and deeply satisfying pride. He is not a slave, he is a builder. And the thing that he is building is not just a tomb for a distant and powerful king. It is a house for his God. It is a symbol of his own civilization, and it is a monument to his own, small and anonymous, but deeply and eternally significant human life. This is a story that is far more complex and far more beautiful and far more true. We have now established a new and more truthful image of the pyramid builders. We have seen them not as a miserable and faceless horde of slaves, but as a well-fed, highly organized and deeply motivated community of skilled laborers and craftsmen. But to see them only as a triumph of brute force labor and logistical organization is to still miss a crucial, and perhaps the most impressive, dimension of their world. We must now turn our attention to the intellectual culture, the deep and often hidden streams of knowledge that were the true and invisible scaffolding upon which the Great Pyramid was built. The popular myth of the ancient aliens proposes a simple, and in its own way, a deeply condescending model of knowledge transfer. The aliens in this story are the teachers, and the Egyptians are the primitive and passive students. The aliens provide the blueprints, the mathematical formulas, the astronomical data, and the Egyptians, like children following a complex instruction manual, simply assemble the pieces. But the evidence on the ground, the evidence from the tombs of the architects and the scribes, and the evidence from the very nature of the monument itself, tells a different and far more empowering story. The Egyptians were not passive students. They were the masters of their own unique and highly sophisticated intellectual tradition. They were not just builders, they were scientists, they were mathematicians, and they were the inheritors of a deep and ancient and profoundly practical system of knowledge. Let us return for a moment to the vast and now silent city of the pyramid builders. Let us walk away from the noisy industrial zone of the bakeries and the barracks, and let us enter the administrative quarter. Here, in the quiet and shaded courtyards of the scribal schools, the true and hidden work of the pyramid is being done. We see a young boy, the son of a high official, sitting cross-legged on the floor, a clay tablet resting on his lap. He is laboriously, and with a deep and almost painful concentration, practicing his hieroglyphs. He is learning the most powerful and the most exclusive technology of his age, the art of writing. To be a scribe in ancient Egypt was to be a member of a tiny and incredibly powerful elite. It was to be the keeper of the state's memory, the manager of its economy, the engineer of its greatest projects. And what was this young scribe learning? He was not just learning to write down simple words, he was learning a complex and deeply elegant system of mathematics. We have the surviving evidence of their work in texts like the Rhind mathematical papyrus, and it shows us a mathematical mind that was not abstract and theoretical, like that of the later Greeks, but was profoundly practical and deeply and ingeniously suited to solving the real-world problems of their civilization. They could perform complex multiplication and division. They had a deep understanding of fractions, and they were masters of geometry. They knew how to calculate the area of a circle, the volume of a cylinder, and most importantly, the precise volume and the surface angle of a pyramid. The alien theorists will often point to the presence of advanced mathematical constants, like pi and the golden ratio, phi, in the proportions of the Great Pyramid, as proof of an otherworldly knowledge. But the papyri show us that the Egyptians did not need an alien to teach them about pi. They had calculated its value themselves, with a remarkable accuracy of 3.16, a value that was more than sufficient for their architectural needs. And the presence of the golden ratio, that beautiful and seemingly mystical proportion that appears so often in nature, is not necessarily a sign of a secret, advanced mathematical formula. It may be the natural and almost intuitive result of a design process that was based not on abstract equations, but on the simple and elegant tools of the geometer, the rope and the set square and the compass. It is a proportion that emerges, organically, from a deep and hands-on engagement with the fundamental laws of harmony and form. The scribe is not just learning mathematics, he is learning a system of project management that would be the envy of a modern corporation. We have the surviving journals of a man named Mera, an overseer who was responsible for a team of men who transported the Tura limestone casing stones to the Giza site. His papyrus logbook, the oldest known written document in human history, is a masterpiece of bureaucratic efficiency. He records, with a meticulous and almost obsessive detail, the daily and hourly activities of his crew. He records the number of blocks transported on each trip down the Nile. He records the rations of bread and beer that were distributed to his men. He records their days off, their absences due to sickness. This is not the work of a primitive tribe. This is the work of a highly organised and deeply literate and profoundly bureaucratic state. The Great Pyramid is not just a triumph of engineering, it is a triumph of accounting. It is a testament to the power of the written word to organise, to command, and to focus the labour of thousands of people towards a single and incredibly complex goal. But the knowledge of the pyramid builders was not just a matter of numbers and logistics. It was also a matter of a deep and almost lost form of artistic and spiritual intelligence. Let us return to the workshops of the artisans, the men who are creating the beautiful and magical objects that will be sealed within the tomb. We watch a sculptor as he works on one of the king's Ka statues. He is not just carving a likeness of the king, he is creating a work of art that is based on a strict and deeply sacred set of rules. The canon of proportions. It must be a representation not of his fleeting and imperfect human appearance, but of his divine and unchanging essence. The length of the foot, the width of the shoulders, the height of the head, all of these are determined by a sacred and unchangeable mathematical formula. This is not a limitation on the artist's creativity, it is a discipline. It is a way of ensuring that the statue is not just a portrait, but a perfect and harmonious and magically effective divine icon. The artist is not expressing his own personal vision. He is channeling a timeless and perfect and divinely ordained ideal of an eternal and human form. And this points to another, and perhaps the deepest and most difficult to understand, aspect of the Egyptian mind. Theirs was not a culture of relentless and disruptive innovation like our own. It was a culture of tradition, a culture that believed that the past was not a place to be escaped from, but a source of wisdom, of power, of a deep and abiding truth. Their goal was not to invent the new, but to perfectly and beautifully replicate the old, to create a statue that was as perfect as the statues of their ancestors, to build a pyramid that was in perfect and harmonious alignment with the ancient and eternal laws of the cosmos. You would not last a day in this world. Your modern mind is a creature of the cult of the new. You are constantly seeking the next breakthrough, the next innovation, the next disruption. The Egyptian mind was a creature of the cult of the eternal. They were not trying to change the world. They were trying to create a perfect and unchanging and eternal reflection of the divine order here on earth. Their great genius was not a genius of invention in the modern sense. It was a genius of preservation, of perfection, of a deep and abiding and profoundly conservative reverence for the wisdom of the past. The alien theorists, in their search for a radical and disruptive technological event, have completely missed the point. The Great Pyramid is not a monument to a sudden and futuristic revolution. It is a monument to the power of a long and slow and patient and deeply human tradition. It is the culmination of 1,000 years of accumulated knowledge, of trial and error, of the slow and generational perfection of a craft. The story of the pyramids is not a story of a sudden and unexplainable leap in human evolution. It is the story of the very opposite. It is the story of a culture that had achieved a state of such profound and stable and deeply confident equilibrium with its world that it was able to focus all of its energy for a century on a single and magnificent and perfectly and traditionally human act of creation. It is not a monument to the future, it is a monument to the deep and quiet and enduring power of the past. The last block has been laid. The final, gleaming, white casing stone has been polished to a mirror shine. The great and temporary city of the builders is slowly and quietly dissolving back into the desert sand. The roar of construction has been replaced by a new and more profound and more enduring sound, the sound of ritual. The Great Pyramid is no longer a project, it is now a god, and it requires a new kind of service. A perpetual and sacred and deeply institutionalized service. We now enter the world of the pyramid cult, the strange and beautiful and deeply complex machinery of eternal worship that was the monument's ultimate purpose. Let us stand in the cool morning shadows on the eastern side of the pyramid. Here, at its base, stands a new and magnificent building, the mortuary temple. It is not a tomb, it is a palace, a beautiful and fully functional palace for the eternal use of the king's spirit. It is built not of the humble workaday mud brick of the workers' village, but of the same fine white Tura limestone as the pyramid's casing, and its inner sanctums are lined with polished black basalt and warm red granite. This temple is now the new heart of the Giza Plateau, and it is here that a new and permanent community now lives and works, not the builders, but the priests. The Hemnetja, the servants of the god. They are a new kind of workforce, a spiritual army, and their duty is not to build the king's house, but to maintain the king's eternal life. Let us follow one of these priests as he begins his day. He is a young man, the son of a noble family, and he has been trained his entire life for this sacred and prestigious role. He lives, with his family, in the newly established pyramid town, a permanent and comfortable settlement at the edge of the valley, a town that will be sustained for centuries by the vast agricultural estates that have been endowed to the pyramid cult. His day begins, as all days do, with a ritual of purification. He bathes in a sacred pool, he shaves his entire body to remove all physical impurities, and he dons his simple and spotlessly clean white linen kilt. He is now a pure vessel, ready to enter the presence of the god. He walks, with a slow and measured and solemn gait, up the long and now covered causeway that connects the valley temple to the mortuary temple. He is not alone. He is part of a procession of other priests, of temple servants, of young acolytes, all moving with the same practiced and deeply reverent grace. He enters the mortuary temple. The outer courtyards are open to the sky, their walls covered in beautiful and deeply magical painted reliefs. These are not just decorations, they are eternal and functional pictures. They depict the king's earthly victories, his successful hunts, his perfect relationship with the other gods. But they also depict the vast and bountiful estates that belong to the temple. They show the fields of barley, the herds of cattle, the vineyards, the fishing boats. And these images are a form of magical and perpetual guarantee. They ensure that, even if the real estates should one day fail, the car of the king will still be sustained, for all eternity, by the magical and perfect produce that is depicted on these walls. The priest moves from the sunlit outer courtyards into the darker and more sacred inner sanctums of the temple. The air here is cool and thick with the scent of burning incense and of the sacred blue lotus flowers that are placed, fresh each day, in alabaster vases. Here, in the deep and pillared gloom, stands the false door. It is a magnificent and intricately carved single slab of stone designed to look like a doorway, complete with a rolled-up reed mat carved at the top. It is a magical and symbolic gateway. It is the interface between the world of the living and the world of the dead. It is through this door that the king's ka, his life force spirit, which resides in the sealed and inaccessible chamber deep within the pyramid, can mystically travel to receive the offerings that are laid before it. And it is here that the central and most important ritual of the day is performed. The priest is not alone now. He is with the high priest, the lector priest who reads the sacred spells, and a retinue of attendants. They are performing the daily meal service for the dead king. It is not a symbolic meal. It is a real and lavish one. Great platters of roasted beef and goose and freshly baked bread are brought forth. Beautifully carved alabaster jars of wine and beer and fresh cool water are presented. The lector priest, his voice a low and resonant and hypnotic chant, recites the ancient and powerful, offering spells. He is not just speaking, he is performing an act of magical and verbal creation. His words are what transform the physical food into a spiritual substance, a food that can be consumed by the king's invisible and eternal ka. The food is laid out on a great alabaster offering table before the false door, and then for a period of time it is left in a state of profound and sacred silence. This is the moment of communion. The moment when the great and hungry spirit of the dead king is believed to come, a silent and invisible guest at his own eternal feast. You would not last a day in this world, not because it is brutal, but because it is so profoundly and so patiently and so quietly strange. Your modern and deeply skeptical mind would be crushed by the sheer and unshakable certainty of their belief. You would see a group of men talking to a stone wall and leaving a perfectly good meal to go cold. You would see a profound and almost insane waste of resources. They see the most important and the most practical and the most necessary act in their entire civilization. They are feeding their king. They are maintaining the divine engine. They are ensuring the stability of the entire cosmos. To them, your skepticism, your inability to perceive the great and spiritual reality that lies just behind the thin veil of the physical world would be a form of blindness, a tragic and deeply crippling disability. After the king's car has had its fill, after it has mystically consumed the spiritual essence of the food, the second and more earthly part of the ritual begins. The food is now considered to be reverted offerings. It has been blessed by its contact with the divine. The finest cuts of the meat, the best of the bread and the wine, are taken to be consumed by the high priests, in a communal meal that reaffirms their own high status. The lesser portions are then distributed to the lower-ranking priests, the temple artisans, the guards, and a portion is even sent down to the pyramid town to be distributed to the families of the priests. This is the economic genius of the pyramid cult. It is a self-sustaining and deeply profitable system. The vast agricultural wealth of the temple estates is used to produce the offerings. The offerings are used to feed the god, and the divinely blessed leftovers are then used to feed the very people who run the system. It is a perfect and closed and perpetual economic loop. And this cycle, this daily and unchanging and deeply meaningful ritual of purification, of procession, of offering and of feasting will continue, not for a year, not for a decade, but for centuries. The priesthood of Khufu will be a powerful and wealthy institution for the entire duration of the Old Kingdom. The Great Pyramid is not just a silent monument, it is the heart of a living, breathing, and enduring community. A community whose sole purpose is to serve the eternal needs of their dead and eternally living king. As you stand, an invisible witness in the cool and incense-filled gloom of the mortuary temple, you are confronted with a worldview that is almost impossible to reconcile with your own. You have been taught that life is for the living, that our resources, our time, our energy should be dedicated to the improvement of our own fleeting and mortal existence. They believed that this life was a brief and chaotic and ultimately an insignificant prelude to the only life that truly mattered, the eternal and unchanging and perfect life of the hereafter. They did not build their great and permanent and stone-built monuments for the living. They built their temporary and mud brick and disposable houses for the living. They invested all of their energy, all of their wealth, all of their genius in the world of the dead. And in this, they achieved a kind of social and political and artistic stability that is almost unparalleled in human history. Their world was anchored to the eternal. Their lives were given a profound and unshakable sense of meaning and purpose by their constant and intimate relationship with their own and beautifully imagined eternity. You are a creature of a world that is obsessed with the future, with progress, with the constant and often anxious pursuit of the new. The Egyptian was a creature of a world that was obsessed with the past, with tradition, with the perfect and eternal replication of the sacred order. And the pyramid is the ultimate and most magnificent expression of that obsession. It is a monument that is designed not to change the world, but to stop it, to freeze a single, perfect and divinely ordered moment in time and to make it last, quite literally, forever. And so, our long and quiet and deeply immersive journey comes to its end. We have travelled back across an almost unimaginable gulf of 45 centuries. We have stood on the Giza Plateau as a bare and windswept rock. We have witnessed the brilliant and human and sacred geometry of its foundation. We have felt the raw and percussive energy of the great quarries, and we have understood the simple and elegant and profoundly ingenious physics of the haulers. We have climbed the great and now vanished ramps, and we have stood with the master masons as they set the final, gleaming, white casing stones with a patience and a precision that is a form of prayer. We have witnessed the magnificent and triumphant and deeply emotional moment of the pyramid's completion. The placing of the golden capstone, a man-made star on a man-made mountain. We have experienced the strange and beautiful and deeply complex spiritual technology of the resurrection machine, the star shafts and the sealed chambers designed to launch the soul of a king into the eternal heavens. We have walked the streets of the lost city of the builders, and we have overturned the long and deeply insulting myth of the slave, replacing it with the far more powerful and far more inspiring truth of a proud and dedicated and highly skilled national workforce. We have sat in the quiet and dusty scribal schools and have understood the profound and almost invisible power of the written word to organize and to command and to create a civilization. And we have stood in the cool and incense-filled gloom of the mortuary temple, and we have witnessed the strange and beautiful and enduring life of the dead, the perpetual and sacred and deeply human work of the pyramid cult. We have, in a sense, lived an entire lifetime in this ancient and powerful and deeply alien world. And now we must return. We must let the image of the brilliant white pyramid glowing under the fierce Egyptian sun begin to fade. We must let the sounds, the rhythmic chanting of the haulers, the sharp, clean chip of the mason's chisel, the hypnotic and resonant prayers of the lector priest dissolve back into the deep and quiet river of time. What is the final and most enduring truth that we carry back with us from this journey? What is the ultimate and quiet and deeply personal lesson that the Great Pyramid, in all its silent and magnificent and enigmatic majesty, has to teach us? The popular and modern myth of the ancient aliens, the story that we came here to gently and respectfully dismantle, is at its very core a story of human inadequacy. It is a story that looks upon a great and difficult and almost incomprehensible human achievement, and it concludes that we, as a species, were not and are not capable of such greatness. It is a story that, for all its exciting and fantastical and seemingly imaginative trappings, is a story that is born from a deep and profoundly sad, and ultimately a deeply cynical lack of faith in the potential of our own ancestors, and therefore in ourselves. The story that we have uncovered tonight, the story that is written in the stones of the quarries, in the bones of the workers' cemetery, in the mathematical precision of the papyri, in the celestial alignments of the star shafts, and in the deep and patient and brilliant light of the Dendera zodiac, is a different story. It is a story of human adequacy. It is a story of human genius. It is a story of a power that is not alien, but is the most profoundly and beautifully and sometimes terrifyingly human power of all, the power of a shared and unshakable and deeply held belief. The Great Pyramid is not a monument to a technology we have lost. It is a monument to a mindset we have lost. A mindset that saw the entire cosmos as a single, living and intelligent organism. A mindset that saw the physical world and the spiritual world not as separate and opposing realms, but as two perfectly interwoven and harmonious aspects of a single and unified reality. A mindset that was capable of a patience that was almost geological, a continuity of purpose that spanned generations, a unity of vision that could focus the entire creative and physical energy of a nation onto a single and magnificent and deeply sacred point. We, in our modern and fragmented and deeply individualistic world, cannot imagine such a thing. We are a civilization of a million different and often competing truths. They were a civilization of a single and all-encompassing and deeply unifying truth. We can argue about whether their truth was, in a scientific sense, correct, but we cannot argue with the undeniable and almost overwhelming evidence of the power that that truth was able to unleash. The pyramids were not a gift from the stars. They were a human response to the stars. They were the result of a long and slow and deeply intimate conversation between a human culture and the cosmos. As you lie here now, in the final, quiet moments of our journey, as you prepare to let go of this ancient world and to drift into the deep and peaceful and restorative world of your own sleep, let this be your final and most comforting thought. The mystery of the pyramids is not a mystery of a lost and alien technology. It is the mystery of our own and often forgotten human potential. The story of the pyramid builders is not a story of a primitive people who needed the help of a superior race. They were a people who had achieved a level of social cohesion, of shared purpose, and of a deep and quiet and unshakable confidence in their own human ability to create a thing of eternal and divine and perfect beauty, that we, for all our modern marvels, can only look back upon with a sense of profound and deeply humbling and perhaps even a slightly envious awe. The alien theory is, in the end, a story that makes us smaller. It is a story that diminishes our own human story. The truth that is written in the stones, is a story that makes us larger. It is a story that reminds us that we are the descendants, not of a weak and helpless and primitive people, but of a race of brilliant and patient and deeply courageous and profoundly capable giants. The pyramid is not a monument to them, it is a monument to us. Let that quiet and powerful and deeply reassuring thought be the great and solid foundation upon to which you can now build your own peaceful and restorative sleep. Let the silence of the great and ancient and deeply human monument on the Giza Plateau be your own silence. Let its strength be your own strength, and let its deep and eternal and patient peace be your own peace. The journey is over. The great work is done, and now you can rest.